what you put on video, that's what the defense, that's what they know about you. Everybody's got really a blank slate for the most part going into the next year, because you can look at someone who's been at a program for 2 or 3 years or whatever and have an idea of what they are over the past couple of years, but they're new players on the field, there's coaches on staff. Everybody really has pretty much a blank slate going into the year.
Coaches, welcome into the Student of the Game podcast brought to you by Coach and Coordinator. Today's guest, I have another special guest to me, specifically somebody that I met through the various camping, process that you go through in the off season. A pretty unique story of how we kind of got to know each other and how our relationship has blossomed since then. But that guest is none other than the UAB Senior Offensive Analyst, Trevor Browder. Trevor, thanks for joining the show today.
Can't thank you enough, man. It's great to see you, great to talk with you, and excited to be on here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the quick story is, so we can dive right into some of Trevor's insights, is probably 3 or 4 years ago, working at camp where they hire in a bunch of college coaches, and I was running the camp, and you get the list maybe a week before, and you see the coaches and what they coach, and that's about it. And as I was doing my prep and setting up the camp, I noticed we had all offensive coaches and no defensive coaches. And I remember, without knowing Trevor at all, I had a good recommendation from Coach Hopperton about you. And he said he's a good coach. So I said, "Hey, Trev, are you cool to coach D-line?" And Trevor responded immediately, "Whatever you need." So we go through the camp. Trevor absolutely destroys it. And then afterwards, in getting to know him, I realized, this dude coaches offensive skill, and he went over there and he coached D-line like he coached it. And I told him in that moment, from that point on, I was like, if nothing else, this is a ride or die type dude that didn't ask questions. He said, "I'll fit in wherever needs to be fit in," and did a great job. And that started our relationship since then. So I always like going back to that story, and pretty cool how those things kind of work out.
No doubt about it. No doubt. Those are great times in the summer, as a sports staffer, just getting the chance to go coach, and appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that, even if it is in a different realm, just being able to go figure it out and help some guys get better.
Absolutely. Well, since then, your career trajectory has skyrocketed, and I think it's continuing to skyrocket. And in the next 1 to 5 years, I think your name will become even more household known, especially within the coaching realm of things. And that's why I wanted to bring you on here. Honestly, you and I do these types of conversations frequently on our own. So when this idea came up to kind of run this podcast, it literally reminded me a lot of these conversations that you and I will conduct every, in the off season. It seems like every 3 to 5 weeks we're on the phone. We've got a topic we want to talk about, and we're kind of digging in. So with that said, I want you to kind of tell the people about some of your journey in coaching, where you came from and how you got to where you're at, just so they can kind of track to how you got to where you're at now.
Absolutely. So I started coaching when I was 18. I graduated high school, from Cardinal Ritter High School on the west side of Indianapolis, where I'm originally from. So graduated from there and immediately, started coaching, when I went to go play college football at Marian University. So I was playing and coaching for 4 years, during my undergrad, which was kind of a unique experience, definitely an unorthodox college experience, but I'm extremely grateful for it because it allowed me to develop my voice as a coach. Like those first 2 years, Danville High School, my freshman and sophomore year, I got to coach the receivers, and I was playing receivers. So I go out to practice, figure out what's going on. I'm on Monday at the high school, and then I'm a college football player Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then as long as we were in town on Friday, I was able to make a lot of their games, and then obviously play my game on Saturday. So it was a really cool 4 years. I'm extremely, extremely grateful for. It was awesome just being able to coach high school football and see the growth in high school student athletes. It's insurmountable, really, when you see a kid that can't even catch football to start, and then he's out there making plays on, if he's a young guy on a Saturday or a Monday, or if he's an older guy, you help him become a better player on Friday night. So that was a really special experience for me. I did that for 2 years, my freshman, sophomore year at Danville High School for Casey Woods. He was a Marian graduate as well. And then my junior and senior year, I went to Cardinal Ritter High School, where I graduated. So it was really cool to go back and learn from the coaches that had coached me. And my senior year was 2020, it was a pandemic year. So I didn't have a season at Marian, but the blessing within that was I got the chance to be the defensive coordinator at Cardinal Ritter High School, which was really cool. Being an offensive guy, and you have to coach all 11 from a holistic view at the high school level was really cool. Put together installs, practice plans, all that good stuff. I mean, that was an awesome experience, and I learned a ton doing that, just having to figure it out. And then graduate, at the end of 2020 in December, and get a unbelievable opportunity to start off my college career at Ball State University for Coach New and those guys up there. Coach Colin Johnson was my connection up there, and he had recruited me out of high school when he was at DePaul University, and we had stayed in touch over the years. When I was at Marion, he had made a stop at Butler University, which was right next door, so I'd go over there and talk football with him all the time. Just a tremendous person, first and foremost, and a phenomenal offensive line coach. So when he brought me up there, they had 2 GA spots open on offense. I just figured I'd go with the receivers just from my background. And Colin's such an amazing person. He said, no, you're going to come with me. Like, you're going to help the program, whatever role you're in. But you're going to come with me in the offensive line. So that way you can have some growth in a new position working with me. So I can't thank him enough for that year. I learned so much and was stretched in such a good way. And just learned a ton in 21, at Ball State. And then, got an opportunity to go to Indiana. That's where, I met you in the summer, 2022, at Mount St. Joe at that camp. But got a chance to go work with Coach Allen and those guys at Indiana on defense as defensive quality control with the linebackers. That was a tremendous experience. Learned defense at a really high level. That was a great experience. I learned a ton just being able to, try and solve problems that offenses are giving defenses nowadays and think with the other side of my brain, as having been being an offensive guy. That was a tremendous experience. And then really at the end of that year, kind of concluded, and we had, one of our operations guys came down to UAB, and that was kind of the connection there when they had an opening. So, I was blessed to be able to come down here and work with Coach Dilfer, and the staff here. Just there's tremendous people in this building, and we have great players and great people, and Coach Dilfer is the head of it all. Just a tremendous person. I don't know if there's a head coach in the country that cares more about his players and cares more about his staff than he does. And he's done so much for me, and can't thank him enough for everything, and just the amount of knowledge that I can gain sitting in offensive meeting rooms with Alex Mortensen and Trent Dell. Like, it's amazing. It's just a tremendous opportunity. And this summer was very fortunate to be the recipient of the Bill Walsh Minority Fellowship with the Tennessee Titans. So really blessed to have that experience and learn a ton, and excited to be down there with those guys and add value in any way I can and learn as much and soak up as much knowledge as I possibly can before this 2024 season gets started.
Yeah, the resume is fantastic. I think is really cool about you, coming from being a D3 guy myself. I know a lot of guys that listen to this, some will have connections to guys at the higher level. But what I think is really cool about getting to know you through this journey that each of us we're on in our separate ways is how you started as a player at the NAI level. You worked directly in high school, which is how I came up. And it wasn't because of some connection necessarily right out the gate that you were at somewhere like Indiana or UAB. You worked your way through various steps, and I think that makes you very personable. And the reason that I really respect you is just the intrigue that you have. Like I said, a lot of the idea for this podcast came from just our discussions. So in us talking, how are you able to combine your general curiosity and thirst for knowledge towards your specific duties at each of these places, while also kind of being able to add to your own intrigue? Because I know you have your own processes to continuously gain knowledge. So can you kind of talk to us about some of those things that you do?
Definitely. Yeah. It's, for me, I think first and foremost, it's about the value you can add in the building that you're in. And I think when you do that, you look up and you realize how much football you've learned, because you're doing projects for, I always say that, when you get projects and you're busy, like, that's a blessing, because those are opportunities to learn. Those are opportunities to add value. So it starts there. And then I think in support staff roles, I think it's extremely important at the end of the day to pour back into yourself. Sometimes it's the very first thing at the beginning of the day, or sometimes at the end of the day. I think as support staffers, the really, really good ones can find a way to jam 2 days worth of work into one. Not actually, but segment themselves into, okay, obviously within my role, I got to do a tremendous job with the tasks and the responsibilities that I have, and think critically and add value to the offensive staff, defensive staff, whatever role you're in. But then also, once everyone leaves that building, whether it's at home or whether it's at your desk, okay, review your notes from the day, pour back into yourself, organize, all those things. And so I think it's really important to be able to pour back into yourself at the end of the day, and not just leave when all the other guys leave, or shut it off kind of when the day's over, because I'm not in that role yet. I'm not calling plays yet. I'm not, position coach yet. So therefore I have to work just a little bit harder and organize those ideas and the things that are preparing me for when that time comes. So that way I'm prepared when that door does open.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I really like that term, pour back into yourself. I think that's something I haven't heard directly. I also think that in doing that, put 2 days of work into one. I think that's a great way to look at it, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're separating yourself from a lot of all these people in this industry, right? It's a very competitive industry. So you're naturally separating yourself. And I think, just like I said in the intro, the way you go about it, I'm sure that that's demonstrated on a daily basis as far as ways that are different than most. One thing that we talked about off air that I really enjoy, and it's really when we started to kick ideas back and forth to each other, is you have an off season, task, if you will, that you do on your own, where you'll call coordinators and you'll ask them specific questions to kind of get different viewpoints. I know you've done that with me, and I'm sure there's a list of other guys. Could you kind of just explain that process and what you're doing and why you're doing it? Because I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I think it goes back to the previous question too, because when you go through a season, there's a lot of things that, you start thinking about that you want to, jog those, you want to make sure that you don't forget those little nuggets. And so I always try and segment my notes, a very organized way that are like, personal thoughts and ideas, that I may present to, our staff, at one point in time, also for me in the future, along with what we're doing as a program here. And so I try to segment those notes, and then, really once the season concludes and we're on vacation after signing day and all that good stuff, I try to organize those notes as best I can to form great questions to ask the best that are doing the things that I want to do in the future. And obviously, I consider you one of those guys, Caleb. Just the ways that you pour back into me just by you picking up the phone and talking football, I can't thank you enough. But, I just try and segment my time throughout the course of the calendar year, postseason, in a way that allows me to have quality conversations with people. Because, I know we didn't get into this, very much at all. But like, to me, I love doing this type of stuff, as far as getting on the phone and talking to people, because like relationships are what it's all about for me, true, genuine relationships. And, I just believe that, I had someone text me last week actually, and, they were talking about just, building relationships and stuff like that. They told me, they said, like, if it wasn't for relationships, you'd be four walls and people just doing work. I mean, just be a bunch of cubicles doing work. Like, that's what's beautiful about this game. But to get like throughout the course of the off season, I try and find those buckets of time where I know in May there's going to be some downtime for those full-time coaches that I want to pick their brains, stuff like that. They're going to be on the road recruiting. So based on the calendar, and a lot of it falls into the recruiting calendar too, I can try and make it a systematic approach to be able to reach out and ask those questions that I were curious of coming out of the season and all that good stuff. So
Yeah, I remember it had to be before last season when you called, and I could just, I love the questions that you asked me. I could tell they were well researched, but honestly, I think you know this about me. I think I even said at the end of the conversation, the questions that you needed and wanted information on allowed me to formulate my thoughts and make sure that I had appropriate answers. And so I'll always remember that conversation. I remember where I was when you did it. I just thought that was fantastic. And I know we picked that up again this offseason, and that's kind of where we've carried it on. So obviously that's one example of a medium. As you go through this and as you've been through this process with these different roles you've had, what are some of the mediums, as obvious or some things that aren't as obvious, that you'll use, like you said, in the buckets of time, which I think is a fantastic way to look at it, that you'll go through? Like, are you still as active on Twitter now that you're in the role in the Division I world as others are? And just, do you still like to hear clinics and whatever those may be for you?
yeah, I think to start, I think there's a ton of information out there, which is phenomenal. Like, that is great. Knowledge is power. But I also think, with that being said, I think it's very important that you have a critical eye with what you're consuming, because you can't do it all. So I think you have to have a very, very critical eye to be able to filter out the ideas that you do garner and have a way to store them, if it does become something that you want to do, but you can't do it all. And so, throughout the course of the year, like for me, there's so many good things, like so many people host all of these types of clinics. Like the pandemic, obviously, was a terrible thing, but the one thing it did bring us was a ton of resources. You can find, if you want to find out something about the game of football, you can probably find it on the internet now after the pandemic. So like just through the worldwide internet, I think you can find a ton of things. Obviously, anytime I open Twitter, there's something, odds are it's about some sort of offensive scheme or something like that. So obviously that's a great medium too. But then also, I really think you can't replace watching film. And, like when you just turn on, we're blessed at this level to have Exos, and we have basically any team that you could possibly want to watch. I think when you study a team or you have PFF and you're able to study just drop back pass plays, if there's something specific that you want to dive into, you can get really, really specific, or you can get it as wide range as some broad topic on a clinic. So I think it's about what you want, but then also having a critical eye of filtering that information upon what's actually usable at this moment, but then what may be usable in the future too.
Yeah, I think that's the key within all this. And I think that's what the essence of this podcast I hope to kind of achieve is that, like you said, there's no substitute for watching film. I think some of the smartest guys that I talk to, yourself included, they're always, at least they're studying somebody, right? They're studying somebody in totality of what this team's doing. Because I think that the best ones understand, like we talked about the other day, it's layers on layers and not just individual plays. But I do think that I really like the notion of having a critical eye, because there are things that can benefit you, whether it's for the exact role you're in now or something that you're creating in the near future, but also potentially long plays where like those ideas can be there and you never know when one of those ideas are going to they're going to show up in a time that you need them. So I think that with all the information, certainly, like you said, you can find what you need to find. And much like you do, I think picking up the phone when you really want to know something specific, that's I think you and I have a very similar process of like, when you want to know something, call the person you want to know. And I know I bugged you quite a bit about very specific topics, and I asked the same question 3 different times in the off season, and it's an evolution of that information. But yeah, I agree with being able to segment those and understand what it is you're looking at. So the one we were talking about off air that I think is interesting, and just really to me, it's trying to guide coaches. I'm trying to learn myself as much as anything. When you arrive at a postseason self-scout, and like what we do is we'll take concepts and go, okay, our efficiency rating was whatever it may be. You understand what it was you were able to produce and what concepts were able to deliver in that particular year. What is it that you do from that self-scout to help steer your off-season study? And like we talked about off air, for me, it doesn't matter. Even like this past year, we were really, really good at deep choice, underneath option routes, and I'm a big believer in RPO. So I'm going to study those no matter what. I want to know what's next, what the best teaching points are. But there's always something that maybe gave you issues along the way. How do you, from the roles you've had, kind of go about that? And I know you have a unique answer to the way you've applied it, but what could you give the listeners in that regard?
Yeah, I think it starts with your personnel, like an evaluation of your personnel in terms of who you're going to have back, who you're losing, where the gaps are that you need to fill from a personnel standpoint. Because I think that drives every segment of the year in our world, post-December, post-May, kind of those portal windows. Like I think you have to assess your personnel and see what your guys can do really well. And I think that kind of drives a lot of it. But as far as this specific question, in terms of, you just finished the season and you're looking at your self-scout moving into the next year, I think it's all about, okay, what do we do good? What do we do well? How can we make that better? How can we amplify that? How can we layer that? You and I use those terms all the time. How can we layer that upon itself and make it better going into this year? Because, you're constantly evolving every single year. How can we make our good better? And then, with the bad, I think it's 2 things. I think it's how can we improve it if it's something that, we need for a specific purpose in our offense. I pull this example from my buddy who's a high school coach. He's like, I'd love to get rid of outside zone. We're very good at it, this, that, or another. But like, you got your keeper games off of it. You got your jet sweeps off of it. There's so many things that it uses itself for that you can't just get rid of it. So I think it's an assessment of, okay, if we were poor at this, what is it used for within the big picture of our offense? And if it's a very small portion of it, maybe it is something you can get rid of. So I think it's an evaluation of that. Obviously, all starting from personnel to start, like I said, but then kind of tearing off into that when you start looking at conceptually what you're doing.
I think that's fantastic, and I believe Coach Sturbick, who we had on a previous episode of this, said the same thing about the first thing they're looking at is personnel, which obviously, not obviously. I think that's very apparent to what I've noticed is the longer I've done it, the more I've had to adjust to personnel is, understanding your core concepts well enough to how you adjust them to your people, right? And I love the idea of what does a concept that maybe didn't didn't carry out the return on investment that you expected it to, what does it mean in the totality of your offense? And I think that's a fantastic way to look at it, because there's going to be things within that, right, that you look at and you're like, it's not good, it's not worth carrying, right? Maybe we didn't coach it right, we didn't call it right, whatever it is, where you're going to cut things. But I always think it's interesting about when you end the season, how do people focus in on what it is they're going to do next? But I love the terms that we have is amplify, layer, enhance, right? And that's what you and I do mostly in our off-air conversations. Like, how do we instruct, teach, coach, call this concept better, right? Which I think is that really at the core of that question. So this next question is one you actually asked me in some of these conversations, and it made my list that I've asked each of our guests. But obviously you haven't called your own offense yet, and yet is the key word, in that you will in due time. But the question you asked me is, what percent of your offensive system do you evolve on a yearly basis? And the way that I kind of tailored it to the situation that you're in is, what's the approach as a non-coordinator to being able to implement ideas that you study for a system that's already in place? Because I think there's a lot of guys that are going to listen to this that aren't in that system construction role, that are studying, if they're listening to this, that they're that type of guy. So what are some of the things that you found in that process that you think have been successful, or are just ways you go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think our fellow senior analyst, Danny Mitchell, he and I work together a lot, and he sharpens me a ton. And he's a phenomenal human being. And, whenever I have an idea, he has an idea, we're able to bounce it off each other. And it makes it a really easy filter system, basically just to be able to, we're talking about an idea and trying to make it better, this, that, or another, before you go talk to the people who are making decisions on the offense. So I think if you have support staff, like as a young guy, as a support staff, as a GA, as a QC, whatever, a support staffer, like the guys that are in that GA room with you, those guys bounce the ideas off each other in there, because it's going to sharpen each other. And then you may stumble upon something that's good that you may want to be able to pull off to be able to add to the offense at some point in time, or try out. Like, I think there's a few buckets of offense. There's things that are like your staples. You have your staples that you're going to do come heck or high water, and then you have your, secondary staples of, they're not the things that you are doing out. They're not the staples. They are the secondary concepts. And then you have like things that you want to date, for lack of a better term, on the spring football and OTAs, just to see if you like it. And so maybe it fits into one of those buckets to where you stumble upon something. But the guys that you're working with in those support staff roles, I think bouncing ideas off of each other is a great way just to get your juices flowing in terms of thinking like the job that you eventually want to have one day. So I think that's the great way to go about it if you're at this level. And if you're at a lower level, I think when you have a smaller staff, I think you can still have those ideas and communicate those ideas, because odds are, if you're working with good people, they want to help you grow too. So you can walk in and ask the receiver coach about something and bounce an idea off of them. And I think asking questions is the best way to learn. When you don't know, don't act like just go ask. And there's plenty of people, I believe, in buildings, at least the ones I've been in, that are more than happy to share knowledge with young guys and help us grow along our coaching journeys, just like they got poured into by someone else. So
yeah, asking questions is the best way to grow. That's you had some good ones so far, but I really like that. And I agree with the sentiment you talked about, because obviously we've never work together except for 3 or 4 hours at one camp, but we'll do similar things where we're always trying to kick ideas off each other just to try to understand what a concept may represent in football in general, right? And then another guy that I know I've introduced you to that I had on the podcast earlier, I would do the same thing with Lane Little. If it wasn't daily, it was every other day, but it was a constant narrative that we kept, or dialogue that we kept going, to where, like you said, you're learning about the concept you're talking about, but you're also learning how to best bring that concept around to fit what is already in place. Luckily, in the last spot I was in, I would have the ultimate say of whether it's there, but I really believe in, much like what we talk about, bringing an idea all the way around and understanding how it fits in, where it can grow to, because at the end of the day, you have to choose what you're going to do. Like you're talking about, there's staples and there's secondary deals and there's things you want to just try out and get a feel for it. So I think that that's a great way to go about it. And especially, like you said, talking to the more veteran, experienced people on a staff is always going to be good. You did this within your within your climb. You worked on the defensive side, right? I can only imagine what being on the defensive side did for your overall knowledge, because I know when it broke through for me, I started to seek the advice or input from our defensive coaches at Mount St. Joe. And that's when the floodgates broke, where we understood really how to break rules that defenses are implementing, right? So I think that's exactly how you go about it. Here's one that I think is interesting, obviously being in, you're very genuinely curious individual within the football realm. You've worked in some big time buildings. But when you go into an off season, just general off season, whether it's for your specific role or your own individual knowledge, how much are you in that analyst role studying yourself? So UAB in this particular case versus others. Like, what is your balance between looking at others and looking at the system that you're already in?
Yeah, we have a term around here. Coach Dilfer says it's and both. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both. I think you can study yourself at a really high level, and I think you can study others at a really high level. Throughout the course of the season, you just never know what you'll find. I always try and find a few teams just to buzz their games on a Wednesday night. Or if you're just, you get towards the end of the year and just action on TV on Wednesday, like there's plenty of things that you can just, it takes no more than 30 minutes for a game as you're finishing up your day on TV. But I think there's a ton of value that you can find in studying others and yourself. So I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I would say it's both. Obviously, you want to be very particular about understanding yourself at a very high level, because that's what you put on video. That's what the defense, that's what they know about you, and everybody's got really a blank slate for the most part going into the next year, because you can look at someone who's been at a program for 2 or 3 years or whatever and have an idea of what they are over the past couple of years, but there are new players on the field. There's coaches on staff. Everybody really has pretty much a blank slate going into the year, and what you put on video is essentially what the opposing defense knows about you going into that next week. So I think that's very important to understand. But like I said, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both. And being able to, study yourself at a really high level and still be in tune with what's going on around various levels of football at all levels, kind of going in throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, I think you've been around some big time guys, but I think that I love that idea between Coach Dilfer, because obviously it is our jobs to study ourselves, right? We have to know ourselves better than anyone else can. But I think that you can get stuck in a vacuum if you only study yourself. And I think that that's where it becomes vital to understand the greater trends. I know a lot of it's become something I've really leaned into, is just understanding what is coming next. And honestly, if nothing else, how are defenses defending these concepts that are becoming more popularized? Because if we don't have future answers, I think it's going to put us in a situation that's disadvantageous at the end of the day. So I do believe that there is a strong value in truly understanding what it is, the system you're running, but you have to make sure you get eyes on, like you said, at all levels, there is value. And even if it's not a full takeaway, right, you can garner things that are going to be very important to your evolution. Last one I got for you is you briefly covered about your bucketing deal. But think of it from a global perspective. There's a lot of guys on here that are in a situation where they have a future vision for themselves to be in that play caller type role, right? They're not now, but they're aspiring to get there, and they're working diligently to accomplish that. When you go through it, right, every offseason, you get closer and closer to putting yourself in that situation. But as you go through, besides just the bucketing, how are you cataloging this? Essentially, are you creating a playbook, for lack of a better term, for Trevor Browder's implementation along with what you're studying and being great in the role that you're already in? Like, do you have a systemization for, are you building a system in the shadows that you can put in place or implement or bring forth in an interview when that time does come?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of times it can be hard to prepare for those things until they're on you, and so I think it's very wise to plan ahead for those, and a lot of times it does, like when it is on your shoes, it forces you to do it, and so I know there's been a few times where people have talked to me about, hey, would you be interested in this? And I don't know if I am or not, but it forces me to go put it into action, put together what I believe, would be the offense that I want to operate in going into that year if I were to get the opportunity. But really the way I have it set up is just throughout like on a hard drive is I have folders really of every segment of offense and every segment of organizing an offense you could possibly think of, and just trying to organize it that way. So that way, if I'm studying something, I can type something into my phone notes and just leave it open. And then I know that whenever I get back to my computer, I can organize it, based on, what it is I'm studying. So, or whatever it is I heard that was a really good idea on a podcast. If I'm driving, I can just make a quick note of it and then, be able to organize it, based on that playbook folder that I've kind of created. It's an ever living document, or they're ever living folder and that whole deal, just to be able to continue to, as you go to different places and you get different ideas, you're able to keep a tally of what makes sense to you, what hits your brain, the best, and what you think is easiest for the players to understand as well. So, I think that's a great question. I think it's something that can easily be forgotten, but it goes back to, I think it was the first question you asked me is like, how do you you got to be really, really good in your role, and add value to the program you're in, but then also pouring back into yourself, in terms of, what's coming next for you, and I think you can do both, at a really, really high level, when you're organized with your time and you understand the calendar of the year and you understand like 24 hours really isn't a long time. So you have to really, really, I believe, plan out your days, and the times and the pockets of time that you get off, the times of the year that, obviously you're tied up in the season, and just understanding those at a very high level, I think is very important to be able to organize where you're at right now, but then also where you're going in the future.
Yeah. And I think that the thing that always, I don't think you've ever even met my wife in person, but she knows exactly who you are because she'll hear you and I on the phone and I'll just look on my head. It's Trevor, right? And she knows that the types of conversations and the just how highly I think of you, because it is, like you said, it's a relationship business. The relationship that you bring back to people is genuine. And I've always felt that. And I love how invested you are into learning the game, but learning people. And that's why you've earned every opportunity that you have and every opportunity that's coming. But that's why I wanted to have you on here, because I think you have a really unique resume to this point. But just, I know the conversations that we have, they're always going to be naturally football, they're centralized around football. But it always comes back to our relationship and what we think of each other, how we can assist each other in the growth. We've talked to each other about good times and bad times, trying times, challenging times, when things are everywhere in between. And that's just the thing that I always like to, with this opportunity, I like to put it out there of just the person you are. And that's what I come back to. I think you're brilliant. I think that you work tirelessly at your craft. And that's why I see and know greater success is coming down the line for you. But just know, we've talked in private plenty, but how much I respect you, how much I respect the way you go about your craft, and just how highly I think of you as a person, because at the end of the day, like you said, we know that you and I, we'd work really well with each other just because of how we can communicate and the respect that we're able to give back to each other no matter where we're at. We've never even been close to working with each other to this point, but that's something that we always kind of have in our dream scenario, right? And I'm sure one day that those things will come to fruition. But that I think that much about you, but I wanted to make sure that I said that, and just appreciate everything that you're doing and how you go about your business.
No, I appreciate that, Caleb. That means a ton. And just, the person you are, the football coach you are, I appreciate that out of it. And to piggyback on your point, it's about relationship. It really is. I don't understand, this game's awesome. I love it. I love the scheme and all that. I love all that. But the relationships are the best part about this. Relationships with fellow coaches, like with the relationship you and I have, but then also the relationship with our players. And I think it's really important and just to never lose sight of that, because I think you can burn yourself out really, really easily with this game, drive yourself nuts when you forget about what it's really about. It's about the relationships, it's about the people that, you're able to pour into and that you're able to be able to pick up the phone and call Caleb. Like I can pick the phone and call you if I need you. It's about relationships. It really and truly is. I have one of my really good buddies, Woody Blevins. He told me a long time ago. He said, "Lift while you climb." We're all on a ascension. In different ways in this profession, but lift while you climb. Help others along with you. Be good to people, and good things will come your way.
Well, Trevor, I really appreciate you coming on here. Can't wait for this to air and everyone to hear what it is I've been hearing for a couple of years now.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on, and thanks to Keith Grabowski for doing this. He picked, obviously, you're the perfect guy to host this. So I appreciate everybody listening, and appreciate you having me on, Caleb.
Thank you again for listening to the Coach and Coordinator podcast. As you've noticed, we now have a series of podcasts on the Coach and Coordinator Network. We're really excited about this series approach and what each different host brings to us. Plus, we have some roundtables, which essentially are hostless podcasts, starting with Think Tank. We recorded that first Think Tank with Dan Gonzalez, Dub Maddox, and Josh Herring, and I'll tell you, it was so detailed and so good in what they put into it. I know you're going to enjoy that series as well as all the other series we have on the Coach and Coordinator Network. Be sure to follow all of our sponsors currently, that Signature Championship Rings, Modern Football Technology, and Titan GPS. Check out our 10% toolkit, where we highlight all of our partners and what they have available to you, as well as some special offers. The link to that is in the show notes. Check out our enhanced show notes at coachandcoordinator.com. We'll be adding content that works better on video or as a download. And follow us on X at Coach K Grabowski.